Okay, so this is Google SketchUp. What Google SketchUp is, it's a 3D modeling software that will allow us to create 3D products that we can then save and print using the MakerBot 3D printers in the Catalyst. So this is what it looks like when you open it up. Right now we have this guy. This guy is always in there to start with. Okay, so right now we don't need him, so I'm going to delete him. And the way I do that is I use my first tool, which is our select tool. And so what this allows me to do is select different objects within my working space and do things to them. So what I want to do is I want to left click and select the guy, and then I'm just going to hit delete. And that'll clear our workspace. I'm going to go ahead real quickly and explain what the different uses of our mouse are in Google SketchUp real quick. So obviously I can move my cursor by moving the mouse, pretty simple. If I want to zoom in on something, I can roll my mouse wheel forward to zoom in or backward to zoom out, okay? And then my other option to change my camera is I can, instead of rolling the mouse wheel, I can press and hold it down and I can rotate, okay? And this rotates my project. Again, I would click my mouse wheel, hold it, and move my mouse, and that will allow me to rotate my camera, okay? So pretty simple. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the tools that we're going to use, and then we're going to create a test tube holder for a chemistry classroom that we could then print using the 3D printers in the MakerBot. In the Catalyst. So our tools, so obviously we started with our selector tool, pretty simple. So again, we can either click on one thing or we can marquee select, so you just click and drag and select what you want to select. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our pencil tool. So what our pencil tool does is it allows me to draw lines, okay? And so basically how this works is after I've selected my pencil tool up here, I will go somewhere on my document. And so I can start drawing lines anywhere on one of my axes here. So I've got the z-axis, the y-axis, and the x-axis here, okay? And so I can go anywhere along here, or I can start where they all intersect. And I typically, when I'm starting a project, I like to start here at the center. This is what we call the origin, okay? This is where all of my axes intersect. And so what I'll do is after I've selected my pencil tool is I will click here on the origin, and I can start dragging. Now you guys can't see it on the file here, but the computer's already started creating the line, okay? And you can kind of see down here in the corner where I'm hovering my mouse around right here, okay? This is telling me the length of my line, all right? So what I want to do is I want to click and drag to the length I want, okay? So that I can either click and drag and create my line. So now there you can see I have a line, okay? So that's one option. I can click and drag it to the length I want, but obviously you can see my length kind of changes really quickly down here, and I may not get an exact value. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to create something with the exact dimensions that you want. Okay, so I've selected my select tool up here in the corner. I'm going to click and drag around my line and then hit delete and get rid of it. Okay, so I'm going to reselect my line tool, go back to the origin, and do the exact same process. So I'll start dragging the direction I want my line to go, and then instead of dragging to where this is close to where I want it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag along here, and then I'm going to type in the length that I want, okay? So typically when you're working with the MakerBots down in the Catalyst, the 3D printers, we're working on an inches scale, okay? So we don't want anything over, anything much over 12 inches long, okay? And so you'll have to go down and check and see which ones are open and what their printing dimensions are, but typically we want to be working in inches, okay? So the project today we're going to be working on is well under 12 inches. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking and dragging, and then before I click again to set the length, I'm going to type on my numbers bar, I'm going to type in the length that I want it, okay? So let's say we want it to be 6 inches. If you look again down here in the corner, that tells you the length. So we've got 5 feet and then 8 1/4 inch, okay? That's really long. We don't want it that long. So what we'll do is I'm going to type in 6, and then to denote inches, we have to use the quotation mark, okay? So once I hit enter, you can see I've created a 6-inch line, all right? This is perfectly 6 inches long, okay? So we can change the dimensions that way for any object that we're creating, any tool that we're using today in this tutorial, okay? So that is our line tool, okay? So I'm going to now show you my eraser tool. This is my eraser tool. What this allows me to do is to erase or delete certain things that are on my workspace, okay? So because we're not going to need this line, I'm just going to use my eraser tool and I'm going to click and delete it, okay? So that's one quick way to do it. Another easy way to delete something without using the line or without using the eraser tool is, again, just to use my selector tool, select it by clicking and dragging a box around it, and then hitting delete. All right, on to the rectangle tool or the shapes tool. So here's my shapes tool, okay? I can either select my rectangle tool, or if I hit the drop down menu, I can change to the different types of shapes. So today we're going to be using the rectangle and the circle tool. All right, so my rectangle tool allows me to create rectangles. Pretty simple. And so like my line tool, I click where I want to start. So this will start my corner, okay? And so again, I can start clicking and dragging the direction I want it. All right, so you can kind of see this is kind of where I want my rectangle to start. All right, and again, I can change the direction or the dimensions of my rectangle perfectly. So what I want to do is I want to make I want my rectangle to be 6 inches by 3 inches. So I'll go 6 inches, and then when we're working with rectangles, you obviously have more than one dimension. So if I have 2 measurements, so if I have a length and a width, I'm now going to have to put them both in the dimensions. So I've got my 6 inches for my width, okay, and then I'm going to hit comma, space, 3 inches, okay, and that will adjust my length and width, okay. And so once I have that, I'll hit enter, okay, and then I can zoom in, okay, and I now have a rectangle that's 3 inches by 6 inches. Okay, so that is my shape tool, okay. So I can do the same thing with the circle. So let me show you how to do that with a circle real quick. So what I did is I just selected my selector tool. I'm selecting my entire thing, and I'm deleting the pieces that are left over because I want a clear workspace. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to the drop down arrow. I'm going to select the circle tool. So the circle tool is a little bit different in that when I click to start my circle, the center of my circle is where I start, is where I click. Okay, so if I were to click right here, that's where the center of my circle will be. Okay, and so I will drag out, and that changes the radius of my circle. Okay, and you can see down here we can change the radius of our circle. So if I want a radius or a circle with a radius of 4 inches, I'll start dragging out, and then I'll type in 4 inches and hit enter, and there's my 4-inch circle. Okay, pretty simple. So now that I have this out, I'm going to go ahead and show you one of my tools, which is the push-pull tool. So this one allows me to take a 2-dimensional object and create either a 3-dimensional shape or a 3-dimensional cavity, which I will show you later. Okay, so let's start by making a 3-dimensional shape. So I took my circle and I clicked on it and I started dragging it up. Okay, so I can drag it up to a specified height by just clicking and dragging it like this, or again, if I want it to be, if I want to reach a perfect height, what I have to do is first create a new circle. So if I want to reach a perfect height, I'll start dragging. I will not let go. Do not let go of the mouse button, because as soon as you let go, you can no longer change the height. So hold the mouse button, and as you're dragging, type in this your desired height. Okay, so for me, let's go ahead and do 4 inches. And then if I hit enter, it will automatically drag it up to exactly 4 inches. Okay, so my cylinder now is exactly 4 inches tall. Okay, so that's the push-pull tool. All right. So now I'm going to go back to a tool that we've already used, which is my line tool, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how to make a cavity or make a hole. Okay. So I'm going to click, and I'm going to draw a shape on top of my circle. Okay. So here's my shape. I've got a little bit of leftover line here, so I'm going to delete that with my eraser tool. All right, so I'll grab the push-pull tool again, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover my mouse over my square until my square has little dots on it that tells me it's highlighted, okay? And I can click and drag down. Now if you see, I've now created a square-sized hole in my cylinder, okay? And if you look down here, if I drag down, I've got a negative number for the distance, and if I drag up, I have a positive number, okay? So if I want a hole, I have to drag down till I see a negative number. Okay, when I see a negative number, I can type in how deep I want my hole. So let's say 2 inches. And if I hit enter, it pulls it down to a hole of 2 inches. So now I've got a 2-inch hole in the top of my cylinder, okay? So that's real quickly how we use the push-pull tool, our line tool, and our shape tool, okay, which are all really helpful. So I've got one more thing to show you, okay, and I'm going to go ahead and show you this right now. So this is our measuring tape tool, our tape measure tool, okay. So what this allows me to do is this allows me to make measurements before I start making shapes, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete what we just did, because this is just kind of a demonstration for you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a rectangle. Okay, so just an arbitrary, that's kind of small. Okay, all right, so here we have a rectangle. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to put a square right in the middle of my rectangle. Okay, that might be kind of hard for me because if I were to do it just by myself, I wouldn't know exactly where to put it and have it directly in the middle. So when I go to 3D print it, I might have a weird looking object. So I want to plan before I start drawing on and cutting holes in this square. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tape measure tool, okay, and I'm going to start on an edge, and if I click and drag over to here, this tells me how long my rectangle's edge is. Okay, so this is telling me it's 2 11/16 inches. Okay, you can kind of see that as it highlights 2 11/16 inches. So if I click there, all right, so now it's got a whole measurement along here. Okay, so I've measured this entire edge, and now if I follow the edge and I go to roughly the center, you see that it changes to a blue circle. This is the midpoint. Okay, so my tape measure tool has measured the length and it showed me where the midpoint is. So I can click there on my midpoint, and if I drag straight across, boom, I've created a guideline. Okay, so now what I can do is I can go to a midpoint here, and I can click and drag straight across until I've hit my midpoint there. And you can kind of see it kind of snaps to it. Boom. And I didn't have to do anything, it just kind of snaps to my midpoint. So if I click there, I now have a guideline that runs right down through the middle of my square. Okay, so I've got one this way. Now what I want to do is I want a guideline that goes through the middle of my square this way. So what I'll do, okay, is I will click on my midpoint here and drag straight across to my midpoint over here. Maybe. And if I keep going, no, maybe not. Let's try that again. Oh, if I start down here and drag up to my midpoint there, how do I get across? There we go. Okay, so let me do that again real fast. Okay, so what I did is I started here, and I started here at my midpoint on this edge, and I went up to the center, okay, and it kind of snaps to the center. If you guys see that, there's my midpoint over here, and it snaps right here. It'll show me a green line. So if I click there, I've created a center point, okay? It's a guide point. You can see if you hover it over it, it says guide point. So if I click on my guide point and I draw straight over to the edge, okay, right to where the circle is, you see that blue circle, which tells us that's the midpoint, and I click, I've now created a perfect cross to show me exactly where the center of my square is, okay? So now if I wanted to put a circle directly in the middle of my square, all I'd have to do is come up here to my circle tool and then hover over the center point, and then I can click and drag until I have a circle, and it's directly in the middle of my square. If you can see that, it's perfect, nice and symmetrical, okay, which is really nice when we're trying to design 3D products that look nice, okay? So now that I've given you a quick overview of my line tool, my shapes tool, push and pull tool, and my tape measure tool, we're going to create something for a classroom, okay? So if any of you guys have taken any sort of science class before, something that you guys I'm sure have used before is a test tube. And one thing that we know about test tubes is they do not stand up by themselves, okay? We need a test tube holder. So now that we have a 3D printer in the Catalyst, I can design a 3D printed test tube holder without having to go and order one from the store or trying to go buy one somewhere, because obviously you can't just go to Walmart and buy a test tube holder. It's not really something that is carried in most places. So now that we have 3D printers, that is something we can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and clear my workspace, and I'm going to delete my guidelines by clicking on them until they highlight blue, and if I hit delete, then it will get rid of them. Let's see if you guys can see what I'm doing here. So I click it with my select tool and I hit delete, and it deletes them. Okay, so now I have a clear workspace. So what I'm going to do is to create a test tube holder, I'm going to need to come up with a basic shape of my test tube holder. So a good basic shape that I like to start working with always is a rectangle. So what I'll do is I'll start with a rectangle, and I'm going to start at my origin here where my axes all cross, and I'm going to click and start dragging my rectangle, okay, to the direction that I want, and I'm going to type in the dimensions, okay? And so again, all I have to do is I just had to click at the corner and start it, so I won't click a second time. So after I've started it, after I'm moving it around like this, I'm going to type in the dimensions. So if I want a test tube holder that can hold my test tubes, let's say I want one that holds a row of 4 test tubes. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to start with a rectangle that's big enough to hold 4. And so a test tube, let's say, is about 1 inch wide. And I want a little bit of space on either edge of my test tube rack. So let's say, let's make it 1.5 inches wide. So I'm going to type in 1.5 inches, comma, by, and if we want 4 of them on there with a 1/4 inch overlap on each end, we want, and a 1/2 inch between each one, we would want 1/2 plus 1/2. We would want it to be 2 inches longer, so 4. So we want it to be 6 inches. Okay, so to have our 4 holes to hold the test tubes with a little bit of space at each end, we want it to be 1.5 by 6 inches. So as you see down here in the bottom, what I'll do is I'll type in, and you don't have to click down here, all you have to do is start dragging it and you just type in the numbers. So 1.5 inches, comma, space, 6 inches. Okay, so here I have the start of my test tube holder. Okay, so now that I have my base, what I want to do is I want to create, because obviously this is just a two-dimensional object, so I want to make it 3D. So what I'll do is I'll use my push-pull tool. I'm going to click on the face. I'm going to start dragging. Okay, and if my test tubes are 6 inches tall, I want to be able to at least have, you know, about an inch to work with on top, so I can grab a hold of them and pull them out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this up to 5 inches. So as I'm clicking and holding this and dragging it up, I'm going to type in 5 inches. Okay, and so what this has done is created a block that is 6 inches wide, or 6 inches long, by 1 inch wide by 5 inches tall. Okay, so this is the start of my object. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to orient myself so that I can look at the top, so I can start cutting the holes where my test tubes will go. Okay, and again, the way we do that is we click the center mouse button, we push down on it, and we drag and rotate our camera, okay, so we can see the top. And I can zoom in and out by rolling the mouse wheel. Okay, so what I've done here is I'm going to rotate so I can see the entire top of my test tube holder. So the next thing I'm going to use is my measuring tape tool, because I want my holes on the top to be evenly distributed across the thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this up into 1 inch increments with 1/2 inch sections between. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my measuring tool, okay, and I'm going to start at my midpoint here. I'm going to start dragging, okay, until I get to 1/2 inch. So I'm going to type in 0.5 inches. Okay, that's my first guideline. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is keep dragging, and so this is going to be my first test tube hole. So it needs to be 1 inch wide because my test tubes have a diameter of 1 inch. So I'm going to drag and I'm going to type in 1 inch. Okay, so now I've got a diameter of 1 inch. Now I need a horizontal guideline this way, going long ways parallel to this one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my endpoint, and then I'm just going to drag straight to the edge, and that gives me another guideline. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat this. So I've got my first hole. Now I want a 1/2 inch space. So I'm going to click, drag, and type in 0.5 inches. Horizontal guideline, so I click on the center and click and drag out to the edge. Okay, so then this is my next test tube hole. So I'll click and drag, type 1 inch. Okay, horizontal guideline again. Okay, so I'm going to click here, a 1/2 inch gap between the two, so 0.5 inches. Then horizontal guideline, so click on the center, drag to the edge. Okay, so my next test tube hole, 1 inch. Click and drag for my horizontal sideline. Alright, so I need one more 1/2 inch, 0.5 inches, and then dragging to the edge. And then my last test tube hole. So I have run into an issue here. I did not measure correctly to start out with. Okay, so my last hole would be overlapping with the edge of my test tube holder, which means that my test tube holder is going to have a cut on the side, which may allow the test tube to fall out. Okay, and we can't have that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click and drag to the edge. Okay, so this is 1 inch. So I'll draw my horizontal guideline. I need another 1/2 inch farther this way. Okay, you can kind of see that I have a 1/2 inch of give over here. I need another 1/2 inch of leeway over here. So I can do that by using my push-pull tool again. I'm going to select this entire face over here. So I'll click down, start dragging, and then type in 0.5 inches because that's all I need left. And if I hit enter, I now have 0.5 inches on this side. So now I have 4 1-inch sections with 1/2-inch sections separating them out, if you can see that, with 1/2-inch sections on either side. Okay? So, now that I've got my sections, I've got them all measured out, I want to set a center point, because if you remember, our circle tool needs a center point to start our circle, and I want to start it exactly at the center of each 1-inch section. So, what we'll do is I'm going to use my tape measure tool, and I'm going to start on the edge of each 1-inch section, and I'm going to measure in exactly a 1/2 inch on each of these sections. And if you see, when I click and I get to a 1/2 inch, if I click again, you can kind of see right there, it makes a little tick mark, okay? And that's again, that is our guide point, okay? So I need one more on this last section. All right, so now I've got a guide point on each of my sections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my circle tool. I'm going to start on my guide point. I'm going to drag out until I get to the edge of my 1-inch section, okay? This means I now have a circle with a perfect 1-inch diameter, okay? So again, I'm going to go here, drag out. And now that I've drawn my guidelines, this process is very smooth, very easy, and they're all evenly spaced, okay? And you can kind of see. Now I have a test tube. Now I've got a box with a bunch of circles drawn on it, okay? So obviously right now this isn't going to hold anything. So what I need to do is I need to now make a hole where these 1-inch circles are, okay? So as you can imagine, we're going to go and we're going to use our push-pull tool, and I'm going to highlight the circle. I'm going to click and start dragging down, and then before I let go of the mouse button, I'm going to type in 5 inches, because my test tubes are 6 inches tall and I want about a 1-inch left over on top so I can pull them out. So I'll start dragging down, and then I'm going to type in 5 inches. Okay, and so now if I use my center mouse button to rotate my camera, I can look down inside and see now I've got a 5-inch hole in my test tube holder. And if I were to rotate down to the bottom, you can see the hole goes all the way through. So as I'm sitting this on the table, my test tube is just resting down here at the bottom. Okay. Now what happens if my test tube holder, if I want to pick it up and move it? My test tube is going to fall through the bottom, right? So if I were wanting to create an object that had a floor on it, instead of dragging down all the way to the 5 inches, because if you remember our test tube holder is 5 inches tall, instead, let's say if I drag down to 4.5 inches. So I'm gonna go up here, I'm gonna go to edit, undo, push pull. Okay, so now my circle's back to the top again. If I click it and drag, and instead of putting 5 inches so that my hole is all the way through the bottom, I put in 4.5 inches, I now have a hole that has a floor on the bottom. Okay, so if I go and look at the bottom here, I still have a floor. Okay, so now if I were to pick up this test tube holder and move it over to another counter, my test tube doesn't fall through. Okay, so you got to kind of keep stuff like that in mind as you're creating in Google SketchUp. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click and drag down 4.5 inches again for each of these holes. Okay, click, drag down, type in 4.5 inches. One more, click, drag down, type in 4.5 inches. All right, so now my test tube holder, more or less, is done. Okay, so now what I've got is I've got 4 1-inch holes that will hold, or 4.5 inch deep holes that have a diameter of 1 inch. Okay, so these will hold my test tubes. And since I have a floor in the bottom, since I didn't drag it all the way through the bottom, I won't have a hole, so my test tubes won't fall out. So I'm done. I have a finished product. So my last step, what I do every time is I just go ahead and delete my reference points. Okay, because when we go to 3D print, we don't want to confuse the 3D printer into trying to print our reference, our guides. So I'm going to go through and delete all of the tape measure marks that we made by using my selector tool, clicking until it's blue and hitting delete. And I'm going to delete even our little reference points there in the center. Okay, and let's say I accidentally click the edge of my circle and I delete it. We don't want that, obviously, so if I accidentally do that, all I have to do is go up to Edit, Undo Erase, and it's back. Okay, so don't panic thinking you have to restart if you accidentally do that. So once I've deleted all my tape measure marks, I have my finished product. So to get our STL file, what we'll have to do is to go up to Window, go to the extension warehouse here, click and open that, okay? And so we can look and see that here our Google SketchUp STL file is one of the options on their top extensions. That's because everybody wants to use this. But if it's not there, don't worry. All you got to do is go up to the search bar and hit STL SketchUp. And what this will allow us to do is to export our file in using an STL format. So now it's installed on our computer. So all I have to do is go to File, is go down to Export STL. So if I click that, what we have to do is we have to select our modeling units. Okay, so we worked in inches. Okay, so we want our thing in inches, and we just go ahead and export. Okay, so all we have to do is our test tube holder, we want to select where we want to save it. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and then I can put it on a flash drive and then take it to the makerspace down in the Catalyst, plug the flash drive into the 3D printer, and select my test tube holder STL file, and it will print me my 3D printed test tube holder. For me as a chemistry teacher or a science teacher in general, a test tube holder is pretty helpful to me. If you are a English teacher and you needed to create, say, a bookshelf separator to separate some of your books by genre, it's a great way to help your students visualize things in 3 dimensions instead of giving them a picture on a piece of paper. And so this has a lot of different good uses. And so our makerspace and the Catalyst is a great way to get familiarized with using these things.